Ukraine, not of the Russian Federation, but we do know that it was operated by well-trained professionals. I think there is a good possibility that those people who push the button were Russian officers and Russian citizens. There is also a small chance that these were Ukrainian citizens, working under Russian command, so-called separatists, but I still believe that there is a greater chance that this was done by Russian military personnel. I think it's clear that those people who shut down the plane are now inside Russia, not in Ukraine, and I think that never the Russian government will allow them to be extradited for international court.
Do you believe that this shooting of an aircraft was an accidental?
Well, it was accidental, meaning that those people who pushed the button, of course, did not know that this was international civil aviation plane. I think it was incidental and a mistake for the Russians, meaning that no Ukrainians were on the board of this plane. I do not think that if the Russian side would hit Ukrainian passenger plane, they will be too upset with this. But yes, it was incidental. They, of course, never intended to shoot down international plane with no Ukrainians inside.
How about the possibility that those people who marked this target had knowledge that it is indeed a civilian aviation aircraft, not a military one, bringing it to the scene as an international act of terror, if this is what happened? Do you find it possible, anyhow?
Well, the system itself, the missile system, is quite complicated, and there is a unit which fires rockets. There is also a unit, the radar unit, which actually tracks the plane. It's not necessarily obvious for those people who are tracking the plane that this is a civilian plane. But again, even if they knew that the plane is civilian, the way it was traveling through Ukraine. And it was shut down near the Russian border. So all those people knew that this is a Ukrainian plane flying from Ukraine, through Ukraine, towards the Russian border. I doubt that they knew for sure that this is a civilian plane. They probably, unfortunately, did not care. And the way they conduct the military campaign in eastern Ukraine, the way separatists, or actually the Russian army, there are actually no separatists. I mean, if you look at them, you see that these are professionals which are well equipped, well trained, their bases are closed. This is done for the reasons these are well-trained professionals, infiltration units, special units which belong to the FSB structure or to military intelligence, the GRU structure. They're not really separatists. They do not care about lives. They do not have respect about lives. And indeed, we may see now that they even do not have respect for dead people and for bodies. The way the whole, the way the Russian government behaves itself, Ukrainian separatists behave themselves, unfortunately, is a proof that they have no respect for dead people as well.
In your opinion, is this tragic event somehow a danger for Vladimir Putin himself? American shadow CIA agency Stratfor states that it might be a problem for Vladimir Putin itself in terms of his internal power structure.
Well, I think first of all, the major change is that at least now people do understand that what's happening in eastern Ukraine is not internal Ukrainian conflict the way the Russian government was presenting it. This is not a group of people in eastern Ukraine fighting against Ukrainian government. This is Russian Ukrainian war. And unfortunately, now we see this Russian-Ukrainian war has international aspect, that actually there are as many foreigners killed as a result of this war as Russians and Ukrainians. This is, I think, a major deal, because when occupation of Crimea started in March 2014, everybody was quote-unquote happy that there were no borders connected to the occupation. Just one person literally was killed. Now we see that this is not a joke anymore. This is not a minor conflict. People are killed. They killed in Odessa, they killed in eastern Ukraine, and now, unfortunately, they killed even in countries like Holland or Australia or Malaysia, those people who has nothing to do with conflict. This is a major problem. I do not think that this will stop Putin. Unfortunately, I do not think this will stop him. I do not think that this will change anything for him in his strategic plans. I think those strategic plans are huge. I think when Russia invaded Crimea, it was clear that this is just the beginning. That's not where it's going to end. It probably will never end with eastern Ukraine or with Ukraine, unless the West starts to react seriously towards what's happening, unless real sanctions introduced, unless the West will change attitude towards this conflict and stop to see it as a local Ukrainian conflict, but indeed we'll start to see it as a beginning of very dangerous major European war.
So what is the huge goal of Vladimir Putin and his structure of power in terms of this international relations and the European war that you just mentioned?
Well, when Russia took control over Crimea, there was signals sent from Britain and the United States and some other countries that, look, just tell us that this is the end of your plan and we will start to be friends again. Everybody was actually ready to forget about Crimea and start a new, fresh life. Indeed, Putin went with his famous speech about annexation of Crimea and told that, look, we are starting to correct mistakes of 1991 when the Soviet Union collapsed. And that's what the plan is. I think the more we see, the more we hear, we know that this is not going to end with eastern Ukraine. If you watch Russian TV, for example, and I do understand that only those people who speak Russian or know Russian watch Russian TV. If you watch Russian TV, they use the new term, this kind of old new term in Novorossiya, referring it to territory which would connect Russian Federation with Moldova through occupation of eastern and southeastern Ukraine. And so if you create this so-called Novorossiya, number one, you take a major industrial portion of Ukraine from Ukraine. The Ukraine becomes an agricultural state instead of industrial power. The Russian Federation, of course, in this case would become much stronger because it would unite its own industry with Ukrainian industry. Then, of course, there were both publications, TV reports about Russians living everywhere and being subject to, difficult life in
mają
places
trudne
like the
życie, prawda, w
Baltic
miejscach
states,
takich jak
including
państwa
Latvia, for
bałtyckie wraz z
example. And in
Łotwą na
Latvia you have
przykład, a na
sort of
Łotwie
population
mamy też tutaj
speaking Russian.
dużo ludzi mówiących po rosyjsku. No cóż,
it's not going to end.
to nie
It's not going
zakończy
to
się
end
tak
with Ukraine.
na
It's not going to
Ukrainie,
end with Belarus.
ani na
It
Białorusi.
probably will never even
Prawdopodobnie
end
to
with
się
the
nie
Baltic states because
zakończy
the
nawet na
logic
państwach
of events will
bałtyckich.
dictate something else. This is a major strategic plan, and whether this plan is going to be implemented or not depends exclusively on the Western world, on the position of United States and Europe. And I think we are still in the very beginning, in the first stage of this war, which is coming. And I think at this point we still have ability to stop it without military intervention, for which no one is ready, of course. I mean, the United States is not ready at this point to intervene militarily. Europe specifically is not ready because everybody has a lot to lose. Germans are worried about Russian gas, which they will not get. Britain is worried about Russian, investment. Every second house in Britain, I believe, in London is bought by Russian business people or politicians. Switzerland is, worried about again Russian money in the banks. Everybody is worried about sanctions. But nevertheless, that's what's going to happen sooner or later, and I think it's rather to see it sooner, because then it's cheaper to deal with the problem. Again, when Crimea was occupied, one person was killed, and the West had a chance to stop it right there, when Russia was just inside the Crimea. Now it's eastern Ukraine. A month from now or 2 months from now, it's going to be the whole Ukraine. Historically, unfortunately, again, Russian army is very active in August. August is coming, and I think we shouldn't close the eyes and hope that the problem disappears itself. The problem will not disappear.
Dr. Felshtinsky, we remember in Poland words of President of Republic of Poland, Lech Kaczyński, in Tbilisi, Georgia. He said, now Georgia, in future, the Ukraine will have the same problem. In further future, Baltic states will have this problem, and who knows, maybe Poland in a future will have a problem with the Russian aggression. Soviet Union and the borders of the influence of Soviet Union was in the east of Germany. Germany seems to be playing together, or at least trying not to make a big conflict with the Russian Federation. What is the geopolitical perspective of this Russian plan? Where are the borders? Where do they want to get?
Well, I think we know where the borders are in Putin's mind. This is obviously those old territories of the Soviet Union, which belong to the Soviet Union, and we're now talking about, of course, European part of the Soviet Union, not the Asian part of the Soviet Union. I do not think they will, try to occupy the Asian part of the old Soviet Union, at least not now. But once again, when the Russian army invaded Georgia, and this was August of 2008, this was the first time when the Russian army was used abroad since the collapse of the Soviet Union in '91. The Russian army, of course, was used in the Chechen republics twice. There were 2 Chechen wars. But this was technically inside the Russian Federation. In August of 2008, this was the first test when the Russian army was used abroad, and the whole world actually ignored the conflict. And this was a signal, unfortunately, a very bad signal to Putin that actually he has silent permission of European community to take whatever he wants to take, if he has a reason for this. And he presented a reason for Crimea, claiming that the majority of population in Crimea wants to be part of Russia. Well, of course, he conducted referendum only after occupation, not before. And if you look, he was doing precisely what Hitler was doing in 1938, when Hitler occupied Austria, which actually supported the idea of unification with Germany. He conducted a referendum there after occupation, not before occupation, and the same was done with Sudetenlands in Czechoslovakia, where Germans, ethnic Germans, were living. When in September Germany occupied Sudetenlands, the referendum was conducted after. So unfortunately, Hitler is doing the same, and we are on the level of 1938 now. And if there was a chance, which was never seriously used in 1938 to stop Hitler in the very beginning, it was in 1938. It was already too late in 1939. We are living through the same period now, as if we are dealing now with July of 1938.
Dr. Felshtinsky, Felshtinsky, one more question. We have one more minute. In Poland, this plane crash or the shooting of the aircraft brings memories of 2010 and Smolensk plane crash. Do you find those two events anyhow connected?
Well, we will never know, and this is the major problem. I believe even by now, not all pieces of the plane were returned to Poland. The international commission, which was created, actually included Russians, which were an interested party into the investigation. I have to remind you that you were waiting for several decades with Katyn investigation and with the documents which were finally given to you by the Russian government, but this was all only after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So I'm afraid the same refers to the crash of 2010, and the same refers, unfortunately, to the crash of 2014. We will never know the truth until this government is in power in Russia, and now this is not just the government, this is the regime. And until they're in power, we will not know everything. I'm quite sure, unfortunately, as a historian, I used to wait, and historians usually get answers to the questions, many years later. I'm quite sure that we will know everything about both 2010 and 2014, but this will not happen tomorrow. This will not happen tomorrow.
Thank you very much for this conversation. Dr Yuri Felshtinsky był gościem telewizji Republika. Zostańcie Państwo z nami o 19:45. Startuje serwis informacyjny dzisiaj. Poczekajcie, jeszcze podziękuję panu doktorowi.
Dlaczego? Roxana, dzwonisz proszę.
Ja muszę iść.
Dziękuję też. Dziękuję bardzo.
Dziękuję bardzo. Do widzenia.
Do widzenia.
55. Ale...
Łamać wszędzie. Łamać to zapewnić. Natychmiastowe złamanie.